Tell me when.
And go ahead.
Okay. Well, after we came up through Italy, and it was, you know, it was typical nice Italian weather, and we went to many, you know, towns, and you are now, remember there was a sign on one, after the Hasty Peas went through, you are now entering Ortona, a Western Canadian village, because they fought some terrible battles hand to hand with the Germans there. But we went through, and we went up to we crossed the Rapido River where the it's at the Gustav line, and that's where the Americans were slaughtered. They were trying to get to Mount Cassino and those areas, and you could see guts, pieces of dried guts hanging on bushes. That they went. Mark Clark was their brilliant general, and I always faulted him. It was the Texas Division who really got clobbered, and they went through fixed gun positions, and they just had no defense. They just forwarded the enemy. You know. But anyway, we came through there, and then we went up to we were heading to the Leary River, and that was the last, one of the big battles before Rome, and we were perched on one side of the river, and the Germans were on the other side. And I remember I was given a message to send once. The enemy have crossed the river behind us, and we're cut off. Well, it turned out they were the French Moroccan Gooms, the Goumier, were the colonial troops from North Africa who were Muslims, and they liked it. You see these guys, you'd see them running toward us. In fact, they were shooting at us for a while till we got it straightened out. And they had bandoliers over their bare chests, shoulders. They had boots, but didn't wear socks, and they were singing some song, and they just charged down that hill. I'll tell you, I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of that bunch. In fact, I told one of those South African guys later, you know, that I knew that they're going to be pretty sorry, the French, because they're training these people on pretty good fighting with modern weapons. They're going to take that Morocco away from them, which of course they did, which was only not proper. But anyway, we were up in the Leary Valley, and after shooting at each other and shelling each other, we finally, the Germans retreated, and it was General Juin was the Free French Forces general who commanded this motley group, but they were great warriors, and we had all kinds of interesting colonial type people. We had sent to my regiment for battle training. It seemed so silly. 50 Gurkhas. Well, they would train with us, and I'd be on patrol, guard duty, laying down quietly, and suddenly a hand would touch my boot. "All right, Johnny." And I never heard him coming. He could have chopped my head off with a cookery knife. And I figured, God, those poor Germans. We brought some pretty nasty people to fight them. But the Gurkhas have finally been recognized as veterans of the British Army. They were technically mercenaries. They hired them from the King of Nepal. That's where they came from, and they were not very big, but boy, they were tough. But anyway, we finally took you know, the Leary Valley and that battle, you know, back and forth, and I got in, you know, gunfights because suddenly somebody opened up with a machine gun. I didn't even hear the bullets because the wind was the other way, but I looked down and there was a spurts on the ground where the bullets were hitting. Well, I finally figured out where it was coming from. And then you could hear the machine, as we got closer to them, the MG-42, the German machine gun sort of went brrrr, and then I'd fire back, blah, 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 blah. But mine was more accurate than they were because it did, you had to shake it by hand to get a beaten zone because it was really like a fancy rifle, a Bren gun. It fired about a rate of 450 rounds a minute, while the Germans, machine guns were more than double that speed, but they couldn't, they weren't accurate, but if enough of them were shooting at you, they were pretty risky. But anyway, we finally took that area, and then in the winter, you know, in January of 44, because we're Canadians, we're tough with the snow, they put us up in the mountains, and out came that heavy greatcoat and my long johns, and we had all this good equipment that the poor Yanks didn't have. And I don't think I ever saw a case of trench foot in my unit, but we wore the right clothes because Canada was a cold place in the winter when they were trained for it. And let's see now, so finally, and so we were stationed up on, we were dug in on what we call Vino Ridge. It was an area, you know, up in the hills, and we could get vino for 20 lire a bottle. We never, I didn't, and my group didn't. We never stole from the Italians. We paid them in, you know, script currency, but they could spend it. And we even bought a pig at one point where I took care of her, and I named her Brunhilde because I was thinking of Kirsten Flagstad, who was kind of a boozeming lady who played the role in the Wagnerian cycles. But and it broke my heart when they finally had to slaughter her. I got to, you know, she followed me around. That's where I found out that pigs are a lot smarter than horses. This one knew I fed her, so she'd get away. She could always pull out of a halter, and then she'd come running up to me, and I used to get these cracks directed at me about me and my relations with Brunhilde, and I didn't even know these Canadian farmers were serious. They had some funny customs, which I don't think I should go into. But anyway, we finally, the Yanks went into Rome. We had to help them, and Anzio was a disaster. They had a general who landed, it was a successful landing at Anzio, and then he sat on his butt and wouldn't move till the Germans finally came down and reinforced it and almost wiped the thing down. And the British Guards regiment went in at a crucial moment and saved the day for the American. But they fired that general and sent him back, retired him. Now, Patton wouldn't have done that. Patton would have been right on their tail and out of there. So, you know, as you can tell, as a fighting man, I admired him. I wouldn't want to be in his troop, but he was a good warrior. But then Rome finally fell, and our battle was over, and I woke up one morning with a fever. Boy, I was burning up, and after a little while, I suddenly started shaking uncontrollably. Well, I know what that meant. So I went to the MO, the medical officer, and sure enough, he figured I had malaria. Now, I took all these pills, Americans call it Atibrin, we call it Methacrene. It was the same thing, it turned you yellow. And if you left one in your pocket or if you washed the shirt, it was permanently stained yellow, which happened to me. But anyway, they sent me to this British field ambulance, which is like a MASH, you know, you saw that series on TV. And the ward was full of people with wounds and everything else. And there was a guy down the ward who had an English soldier who had sores all over his face, and they thought he had secondary stage of syphilis. Turned out he had smallpox. He had never been vaccinated. He managed to duck it for religious reasons or what. But everybody in that ward was immediately prisoners. You know, we were quarantined, and they shipped us by sealed ambulances. This is now June of '44, and just before the invasion. And we were shipped to this hospital. This is after Rome fell. And we were shipped to this hospital, which the Canadians had just taken over. And how I remember Sister Miller, she ran this thing with an iron hand. There was a major medical officer who was in charge, but she ran it. And in this ward, there were several badly wounded German soldiers, you know, legs off, badly, you know, shot up. Then there were some Welshmen, and then some Englishmen. And I have to distinguish, they're a different race of people. You know, you get two Welshmen together, you know what you got? A choir. But anyway, we had some Canadians, and I woke up, I still had malaria with the quarantine, and this smiling blonde-haired guy with a nice round smiling face was holding a thermometer. I figured he's an orderly, and I look up at his shirt, and there's a big eagle on it, and under the eagle is a swastika. Oops, I'm a prisoner. Well, it turned out he was the prisoner, but he and the other orderly had volunteered to stay behind. They were both medical students from Vienna, and they'd been drafted in the German army. But this guy took perfect care of me. And when the Welshmen found out that one of them, they had a string quartet originally, but two of the quartet got away. So one of them had a violin, the other a viola. And when the Welshmen found out they had musical instruments, we had a choir. Because the Welshmen insisted that they play for them. So what the hell, they're happy they played. They learned some Welsh tunes, and the Welshmen learned some German song, and the English were fraternizing with the enemy. And I remember saying to this English, what the hell are you talking about? Look at that guy with his leg off and his face half shut away. He's someone we're supposed to hate? Come on now. So now, yes, out. So anyway, I learned, you know, and pretty soon you start seeing these Germans, they're just like us. You know, how the hell do and I've said, why am I trying to kill them and they're trying to kill me? The people that start the wars, they never get in this situation. And so, maybe quite a pacifist. Well, anyway, I had been in this ward for almost the 28 days when I was allowed out on leave. And the British, if you're a hospital patient, you're given a blue suit. It was really an ugly flannel thing, and a white shirt and a red tie, significant of wounds, I guess. And so I got out of the hospital. Sister Miller, I told her I wanted to go find the Vatican. I wanted to see the Vatican Museum. So anyway, we were only a few blocks from the Vatican, our hospital. And so I remember walking down the street, and I stopped this priest, and I said, "Pardon, patrone, dove il varaki?" I don't know what I said. He said, "No, lad, you don't have to talk in your terrible Italian. I understand English very well." And he was a member of the Irish Fathers. They were the ones who saved civilization. A book's been written about them. These Irish monks collected and saved books during the Dark Ages, where education was gone, but it was all in, and they had this church in Rome. And Jeannie and I later visited the church when we went back to Italy, and they had excavated way down, and they found under the church altar way down, they found a Minoan temple under there. That's what it was originally. And they had, dug up artifacts, and they really were still educating people. I was quite impressed, which made me want to go back to Italy later. But anyway,
Frank, I'm going to move that camera.
okay.
All right, and go
Okay.
ahead.
Well, I have to go back a little. I just brushed over the Brent carrier. The Brent carrier weighed about 3.5 tons. It had 7/8 armor on the front and about the same on the bottom. The sides were about 1/2 inch, and it could go in a good road. It could make 55 miles an hour. It could go backwards up a hill at an angle of 65 degrees. It was full tracked. If you gave the wheel a quarter turn, it would just slightly lock it. If you went all the way over, it spun in place. So you could be in a narrow road and shot at. You could turn around and get the hell out of there. So it was a very... It was made originally by the Ford Motor Company. It was the Ford Universal Carrier. But the Americans didn't want it. But the British took one look at it, and they were big. If you look at the movie Desert Victory, you see them all over the place because they could travel anywhere. Desert,
Want some water?
Oh, here it is. I'll get it. Salud. Good.
Okay, so let's talk about the hospital again.
Oh, yeah, okay, so I'm back in the hospital, and I was finally released then, but in the meantime, I'd gotten, and I only regret that I didn't get names and addresses of, I would have liked to follow the medical career of my orderlies, because I'm sure they went back to Vienna, finished medical school, and they were part of the hospital. We were all, it was as if we were in another world, the hospital. And I think that Sister Miller, and you recognize that in British forces, a registered nurse is called sister. So therefore, they weren't nuns, far from it. And she's the one we had contacts with, and they kept taking blood samples from me. God, that was annoying, because everybody wanted to see the parasites, And all those people that were in the medical world, they saw enough of it. It turns out what happened, and my son sent me a tape from the BBC. Mussolini had cleaned out the Pontine marshes, drained them. Well, the Germans broke all the barriers and flooded them again, and reintroduced the mosquito as a war weapon. I guess I was wounded by German action, but I don't think they count as a bite from a mosquito, so I never applied for anything. But that's what happened, and because I shouldn't have had malaria, and you don't know when you're bitten by a mosquito. They're very clever. They're like Dracula taking blood. You don't know that he's done it.
Can you talk a little bit about the incidences where music was made inside of the
Oh yeah.
the
Well,
quarantine?
these guys were two very well educated, and they volunteered. Apparently, they could have gotten away, but they decided, and their medical officer agreed for the safety of the German prisons. They didn't know when the Canadians would get there, so that they should stay, and they were willing to do it. They knew the war was what was going to happen. They were very intelligent guys. The one I didn't know too well, so the one that I can't think of his name now, who took care of me, and he told me all about Vienna and what it was like and how lovely a place it was. And I figured they're just like us. They're not my enemy. Something outside is the enemy. It's what is it? Why are we? Hitler was evil, and I guess maybe we were a little evil in places too. A lot of evil, I'm afraid. So I'm hoping that's why the UN was such an important step. Unfortunately, it's been weakened a lot, but the concept was so good that we would, be one world, because that's what we are. But as I said, I didn't even think much of it after a while, and I can't even remember being kicked out of the hospital, but I guess I got out, and I was given some back pay, which was nice to have, and I given discharge papers from the hospital, so they knew I was legitimate, and papers giving me a 30-day leave. So that's when, so I headed out of there, and the regiment had moved, and I didn't even know where the heck they were anymore. So I decided that I wanted to see the ruins of Pompeii, just like that. So I hitchhiked down there. I had a kit bag full of foodstuffs. It's always very good for trading material. Uh-oh. That's your dog.
No, not our dog.
Oh, it isn't?
The neighbor's dog. There's nothing I can do about the neighbor's dog.
Not really. Oh, okay.
So you head to Pompeii.
Yeah, so I'm heading to Pompeii, and I get down there, and I get a little pension, a little, little boarding house, where I sold some foodstuffs. We all were in the black market, And then I was out at a bar, restaurant, outdoors place, and I see this guy coming my way. Obviously, he's a First Nation American, Canadian Indian, and he sits down. And, give him. I got a bottle of vino, and talking. He was in the PPCLI, the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, which is a great Western Canadian infantry regiment. They were big in World War I and World War II. And he introduced himself. His name was, he said, "I'm Percy Yellowbird." Well, his name was Yellowbird, but he felt he should have a first name. It's more civilized. He farmed in Saskatchewan, and he was interested in culture. Well, when he found out why I was there, and his eyes lit up, and he was carrying in a beat-up case a violin. And apparently, he bought this violin or traded it probably for something. And he taught himself to play it. He didn't even hold it under his chin. He held it like the old fiddlers do. But he could actually play it pretty well. And he wanted, to get educated, and someone said, "Hey, Chief," and he said, "Don't call me Chief. I'm no bloody greenhorn." He had this beautiful Irish accent. He was one of those Indians, and the same happened to Canada as happened to United States, who were taken away from their families and sent to school to civilize them. Well, obviously he went to, and he told me that he went to this parochial setup, and he spoke like his teacher, and he had the most beautiful Irish accent you ever heard. But I said, I think I can do something. So anyway, we went around, asked questions, and somebody pointed out a man, an old man, Italian, who could speak English, who had been a guide at Pompeii. It was technically, the ruins were closed, but he had the key, he knew where the key was. So he said, people can get in. So we made an appointment with him and paid him. And he took us on a tour of the ruins of Pompeii. We ran into the first one. It was Margaret Bourke White, who was a great American lady, war correspondent. She was in there. She got in. And he took us, we saw all the signs, the beautiful buildings, and it was all excavated. I think they did further excavation later. But we were impressed. My God, this place is better shape than the typical current Italian village. It was, beautiful civilization they had in Pompeii. And so Yellowbird and I saw all this stuff, and he kept admiring. I had a shirt my father sent me. It was dark green, Irish poplin, an American Army officer's shirt he bought and sent it over to me. And I had my red patches for the 1st Canadian Division on the sleeves. That's all that identified it as Canadian, but he kept admiring it. Well, when we finally split up, I gave him that shirt as a present from me, and I never saw him again, never heard anything about him. I don't know if he's alive or dead, but he just so grateful for it. And I thought, God, that's a much better use than me keeping this thing. But I'm sure not going to wear it in Bridgeport, Connecticut. But I learned a lot about it. He told me about how the Indians, the First Nation people were treated. That's the same story as the Americans. When I say the Canadians and Americans are alike, that's how they treated their Aboriginal. And that really taught me a lot.
So what happened when your leave was over?
Oh, well, my leave was over. I went looking for the regiment. Well, the regiment, by this time, I don't even know where they were, but I went to the Army. There was a repatriation center I was sent to. Well, the first thing you know, I got a job. They said, "Hey, you're educated, and we need some help." And we had the repair for all of the vehicles, a big center, and they needed to have a schedule of inspections and maintenance on all their trucks. Well, I, who know nothing about it, but I read all the manuals and I drafted them, even how to put iPod 90 into the wheel hub, on how to do it so that you didn't fill it up, you just put it about half in and smeared it with, it felt so good, that grease. And then they followed my directions on it, on what to do with all the vehicles. And it was kind of an interesting thing, and I really had a good job. I had quarters, and it was. Then I got back and doing some signal corps work, and I got into picking up, going up to the airport and picking up mail. that came down for the division. We were pretty much out of combat by then, our units. And my regiment had been shipped back to England, and I didn't even know that at the time. So anyway, I'm trying to think now so anyway, I had I did this work, and then my brother showed up. He was, no, I didn't see him there. I saw him in England. I was sent down to this repatriation center, and I got on the Britannic, I think it was, and was shipped back to England. And the war was still on in Italy, not Italy, in Asia, just before VJ Day, and we hadn't had VE Day. I was back in camp at Blackdown, where I got an offer I couldn't resist. Captain Crawford, he was a professor of English at Dalhousie University, and he was the educational officer for the area. So he said, well, how would you like to come to work to help with me? He says, and we'll make you a corporal. That's how I got to be a corporal. And so I took it on. I gave lectures to Canadians about Canada. That's where my favorite artist, Canadian artist, was someone named Tom Thompson, who was a wonderful outdoor artist. He was drowned in a canoe accident sometime later, but his work is very popular. And anyway, I would hand out all the newspapers. I had there was the Maple Leaf, which was the Canadian paper, the 8th Army News, and the Stars and Stripes, and I had them all, and plus overseas version, I think it was of Herald Tribune. And it was like a civilian job. And I started thinking about education. That's where I found out about that I could get educated later. I didn't realize I would qualify for the GI Bill under a treaty with Canada and the United States, but I did. So anyway, I finally got back to England, and it was like going home. You spend all that time on leave there all the time, and training. And so I had a really nifty setup in England. And I had a pass book, so I could give myself a special pass to go into London. They were cutting back on those because all the people were coming home. And I was in Blacktown on VE Day when the war in Europe ended. And it was a tough day for me because people were shooting off fireworks and throwing them around. Every time one would go off, I'd fall down. I was still a little bomb happy. It takes a long time to get over it. And, it was just an exciting time. Then life came normal, and Captain Crawford would lend me his bicycle, and I'd go off and I found where my brother was in England with his division had come back, the 3rd Canadian Division, and we'd meet in London. We'd go on leave, and it was really kind of nice. Although the last thing that happened, just before the war ended, I was down on leave, went to Marble Arch area, which is a lovely part of London, and a lot of the diplomatic corps down there. And I was Sunday morning, I still remember it. I'm suddenly flat on my face, covered with broken glass. Then you hear this thing coming through the air and the big explosion. And I get up, I'm still in one piece. It had hit up the street a V2 rocket. And this little English lady, this old lady, she looked at me and said, they sort of went up a bit, don't they? I said, yeah. He said, what you need is a nice hot cup of tea. That was the solution. Always a cup of tea would cure any ill to the English. But I said to myself, I need to get the hell out of here. So I took the train back to Blackdown early, where I was stationed. I said, I'm not going to go through this whole war. It's almost all over, and get killed in London. So that ended.
Can you talk about how you ended up becoming an American again?
Oh yeah. Well, when I signed up for the GI. I found out that I was qualified for the GI Bill because Canada had more Canadians who were in the American Army, it turns out, than vice versa, because the Americans paid better. And of course, they weren't volunteer army, but I never tried to transfer out. And let's just see. Oh, so when I think I know what I wanted to get a passport, and then I found out that I was interviewed by someone in the State Department in Italy. I'd gone down to the embassy to try to register there. Instead, I admitted that I'd swore allegiance to the King of England. Well, I expatriated myself. But I went to the Justice Department. I was back at Penn now, going to the University of Pennsylvania, and I had this GI Bill, and I was very nervous about losing it. So I went to the Justice Department. They said, oh, that damn State Department, they don't know what end is up. We can rebate. We'll take care of, help you. So in Philadelphia, I stood up in federal court with 6 French war brides and swore allegiance to the United States, and that got me so I have a big certificate of nationality showing my former allegiance is Great Britain. When it's threatened, it's scary, because I was not going to. I thought, if I can't get repatriated, I'm going to go move to Canada. I mean, I like Canada, but that was where my home was.
Can you talk? So the experience in the hospital was pivotal.
It was. It made me feel. It really convinced me that war and killing your fellow human is evil. That is not a solution for supposedly civilized people. I could see the ancient Romans and the Phoenicians and all those, but it just, when I start seeing the enemy as human beings, see, that's a dangerous thing. You're supposed to, that you don't talk about the Japanese, you talk about the Japs, or the Germans, or the Huns, you always had a pejorative name for them. And it took seeing these people as real people and working with them and talking to them and to say, this is wrong, this is evil. I remember even in the Leary Valley, we dug a double slit trench, me and Wayne Johnson, and as we were getting shelled by both sides, you'd hear a shell, our shells going over fast, and then you'd hear fluff, 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 fluff. That was a broken driving band on a shell. That's that thing that makes a twist in the barrel. And when I heard that sound, it meant it was falling short, and it was one of ours, And I said, Wayne, and I said it, then I said, if the guys that start these wars had to be up here fighting them, I don't think we'd have any wars. I mean, he nodded, but, I thought later, I bet for thousands of years soldiers have been saying that, that it's something, the big, the shakers and movers get us in, like George Bush and even the other side, you know, in Iraq and Iran, there's so many warlike people that the rank and file don't want to do it. So it's easy to change your position. And yet I know sometimes it's necessary. I think going into Yugoslavia and, you know, the Kosovo thing, that was an essential thing. That was a humane thing to do. And I wish we could do something instead of where we've been in that Iraq was a disaster.
As you went through your life, Frank, I mean, you went into law and
Yeah.
you had a family. I mean, was there anything? How did that experience change the way that you lived your life or interacted with your community?
Well,
or raised your kids?
You know, I became a lawyer. I am not. I wasn't an ambulance chaser. I ended up doing municipal law. I represented Rochester Township for 45 years. I also did a lot of estate planning, estates, and real estate. In fact, at the end, I was chair of the real property section of the State Bar Association and got an award from them. But real estate was what I loved the best, because that's the way we measure wealth, really. It starts with land. Then before they had money and land and cattle, I guess. So I think I became, you know, someone who, I want to make peace. And when people get into disputes, I would try to get them worked out. You know. It's always better to work something out than to go sue. Once you're in court, you've got an enemy. And some lawyers, especially divorce lawyers, I shouldn't pick on them, but I do. They can stir things up to make people who wanted an amicable divorce non-amicable, because then they'd make more money. So I love the community, and I guess I like people. And, even my prisoners in the jail, you know, I care for them.
Do you remember any of the music that you made in the hospital with the Welshman and the Viennese string or duet?
Well, actually, I talk to the Welshmen because I love listening to Welshmen speak. They go up and down like that. It's a musical accent. That's why you know, they're famous for their choral groups and their stinking coal mines. You know, there's the good and the bad there too. But I thought that was a wonderful thing, and that Sister Miller was helpful. You know, as the years went by, I started appreciating. She scared me a little in the beginning. She was such a bossy lady. I wasn't used to that, but she really ran that place well. She knew how to keep. There must have been 60 of us in that big ward, and they're stuck together for a month. It takes a lot of skill to keep things happy. And you know, there was as much enmity